A particular version of Hollywood's past gets repeated endlessly. The legendary era, the sophistication, the icons, the wonder. Yet concealed beneath all that shine lies a considerably more troubling account. One that most cinema programs overlook and most film documentaries choose to avoid. Before the production code locked down the entertainment industry, an entire wave of filmmakers was crafting pictures that were truthful, unpolished, and completely fearless. Pictures that portrayed longing, hardship, greed, and endurance in ways that reflected genuine human experience. And for their boldness, a number of them suffered consequences that can only be called professional annihilation. They were silently erased from studio employment lists. Telephone calls were never returned. Names disappeared from consideration. In the film industry, no official exclusion list was needed when the business simply ceased making contact. These are the 10 pre-code pictures that ended their filmmakers' careers, not for producing poor work, but for producing work that was far too truthful for the era surrounding them. When Paramount Pictures assigned Stephen Roberts the task of bringing William Faulkner's Sanctuary to the screen, every person involved recognized they were working with volatile subject matter. The source novel had already earned notoriety in literary communities, a savage exploration of brutality and moral decay concealed within the veneer of Southern respectability. Roberts tackled the material head-on. Miriam Hopkins portrayed Temple Drake, a university student whose harrowing ordeal tears apart every illusion of safety and civilized order. Roberts filmed it with a raw psychological force that carried an almost journalistic truthfulness, refusing to sand down its harshest corners or hand audiences the reassurance of simple conclusions. The backlash was swift and overwhelming. The Catholic Legion of Decency, then commanding extraordinary cultural authority, labeled the picture harmful and organized efforts to remove it from cinemas nationwide. Censorship authorities in Pennsylvania and New York withheld screening licenses entirely. The uproar reached the halls of Congress, where film industry leaders were summoned to answer for their obligations to societal standards. Roberts had produced something genuinely powerful and genuinely authentic, and the industry responded by shutting him out. The major studio entrances closed one after another. Opportunities ceased to materialize. He carried on with peripheral assignments at the edges of the business, but his time at its center had passed. The story of Temple Drake is now examined as a landmark of American cinematic authenticity. Its filmmaker, however, suffered consequences that modern audiences could scarcely comprehend. Gustav Makati was a filmmaker from Czechoslovakia possessing an artist's vision and a novelist's deliberateness. His picture Ecstasy was, by any fair assessment, a work of understated artistic elegance. It followed the journey of a young woman confined within a passionless marriage, reaching for something genuine in a world constructed to withhold it. The production featured a then entirely unknown performer named Hedy Lamarr, and its celebrated lakeside sequence conveyed human fragility with a tenderness that European observers immediately identified as something extraordinary. The American response was something altogether different. Religious figures denounced ecstasy from their platforms. The Catholic Legion of Decency proclaimed it a threat to moral values and spiritual integrity. Cinema owners faced organized demonstrations. Municipal authorities in Boston, Chicago, and New York prohibited the film entirely, declining to approve even substantially trimmed versions. Makati was transformed into a representation of everything that American moral watchdogs dreaded about overseas artistic influence. When he eventually made his way to the United States during the late 1930s, intending to construct the professional life his abilities so clearly merited, he discovered that every significant studio had already turned against him. He received offers for minor supporting work, low-grade productions, instructional appointments. The performer he had introduced to the world, Hedy Lamarr, ascended to become among the most celebrated figures in American cinema. Makati never regained solid professional ground. Fellow immigrant directors quietly referred to it as the ecstasy curse, a darkly humorous phrase that contained very little actual humor. His creative perspective had been too unguarded, and candor in an unforgiving environment carries its own particular form of destruction. Roy Del Ruth represented the category of filmmaker that studios depended upon without question. Adaptable, reliable, equally capable of steering musical productions one year and uncompromising dramatic stories the next. Employee's entrance stood apart from everything he had previously attempted. It was a cool, unsentimental dissection of the predatory inner workings of corporate America, anchored by Warren Williams' portrayal of Kurt Anderson, a department store executive who regarded personal ambition as justification for virtually anything. Del Ruth refused to dilute the characterization. He allowed the ugliness to exist undisturbed. The picture was not simply the story of a single corrupt individual. It was an indictment of an entire structure. That structural condemnation was precisely the element that rendered it threatening. Religious organizations and community groups launched aggressive campaigns against the production. The Catholic Legion of Decency issued an unconditional denunciation. In Memphis and St. Louis, regulatory authorities removed entire narrative threads. Inside Warner Brothers, circulating internal communications cautioned Del Ruth that audience expectations were evolving and that he was expected to steer away from difficult subject matter going forward. The studio that had previously welcomed his abilities suddenly grew wary of his creative judgment. He was overlooked for the prominent assignments he had been steadily working toward. He relocated to lesser studios. His creative latitude was exchanged for measured restraint. The implication was unmistakable. Expose the true mechanisms of how business operates, and that same business will systematically exclude you. Phil Goldstone occupied the dual position of both producer and filmmaker, granting him an independence that those under studio contracts almost never experienced. He channeled that independence into The Sin of Nora Moran, a picture structurally unlike nearly anything the film industry was producing at that moment. Its fragmented chronological approach, its rejection of moral simplicity, its commitment to investigating the inner world of a condemned woman rather than merely pronouncing verdict upon her, these represented audacious creative decisions that seemed to belong to a generation of filmmakers not yet born. Zita Johan's portrayal endowed Nora with an emotional richness that was authentically devastating. The censors and moral authorities perceived none of this as artistic progress. They identified it as an assault on decency. The Catholic Legion of Decency issued demands for extensive revisions. Exhibition venues across the Midwest confronted organized demonstrations. Entire regional markets throughout the South rejected the film outright. Meanwhile, the major studios, observing from a careful remove, quietly terminated their interest in working with Goldstone. The prestigious assignments evaporated. He withdrew into minor genre productions, generating work that engaged only a portion of his genuine creative ability. Goldstone had constructed something authentically innovative, and the industry transformed him into a warning for others. Only in later decades did serious critics begin acknowledging what he had truly built. During his own professional lifetime, the cost of declining to pursue safety was complete industry exile. Lowell Sherman had been accumulating genuine professional momentum when he committed to Born to be Bad. The production, featuring Loretta Young in the central role, was constructed around a protagonist who was perceptive, tough, and entirely without apology for either quality. In the overwhelming majority of Hollywood productions from that period, a woman fitting this description would inevitably face punishment. She would endure suffering, seek redemption, or meet destruction. Sherman rejected this narrative expectation entirely. His picture presented her practical intelligence as authentic capability, her self-assurance as something rightfully earned, her capacity to endure as a quality worthy of respect rather than correction. The censorship apparatus reacted with hostility. Religious leadership issued vocal condemnations. Local regulatory bodies in multiple cities mandated significant removals. Studio management began classifying Sherman as a professional hazard, someone whose creative sensibilities fell too far beyond the permissible boundaries for an enterprise increasingly consumed with protecting its standing. Born to be Bad became an emblem of pre-code resistance, yet its creator found himself progressively pushed away from the industry center. Even before his unexpected death during that same year, His professional prospects had largely collapsed. What endures is a picture that serves as confirmation of a genuine creative sensibility, and a professional trajectory that was being quietly dismantled at precisely the moment it deserved to flourish. Earl C. Kenton had assembled a solid professional foundation directing well-received comedic and horror productions. Search for Beauty appeared, from the outside, to represent a relatively uncomplicated undertaking. It was presented to the public as an exploration of physical fitness and athletic achievement, with Busta Crabbe and Ida Lupino leading a production filled with communal exercise displays, aquatic sequences, and light-hearted humor. What it genuinely represented, beneath that presentable surface framing, was a playful and irreverent picture that pressed against every available boundary with evident delight. The Catholic Legion of Decency received none of this playfulness warmly. They declared the picture inappropriate for public exhibition and organized congregation members to avoid theaters presenting it throughout the country. Censorship committees across the Midwest and southern regions mandated the elimination of entire sequences. Certain municipalities prohibited it without qualification. Kenton's connection to the resulting controversy attached itself to him as a lasting professional disadvantage. Following Search for Beauty, the prominent studio assignments ceased to arrive. He spent his remaining professional years in underfunded horror and comedy work, removed from the mainstream recognition he had been steadily approaching. Within a Hollywood culture consumed by the management of public perception, even a solitary production that transgressed the unspoken boundary could permanently seal available doors. Kenton absorbed that particular lesson at the most damaging possible moment. William A. Wellman had constructed his directorial character around unflinching authenticity. He held no interest in reassurance or uncomplicated resolutions, and Midnight Mary aligned entirely with that established character. Loretta Young portrayed Mary Martin, a woman formed completely by adversity, compelled into desperate decisions by a world that had consistently withheld fair treatment from her. Wellman guided her narrative with an unrelenting truthfulness that refused to produce the transformative resolution that both audiences and censors had come to expect. Mary possessed intelligence, depth, and genuine humanity, and the picture concluded according to her actual circumstances rather than in service of moral satisfaction. The Catholic Legion of Decency delivered a devastating formal denunciation. Municipal censorship officials spanning the entire country required revisions, compelling the studio to produce separate versions tailored to individual regional markets. For Wellman, the consequences arrived immediately and persisted. Studio leadership, navigating the increasingly restrictive code environment, began redirecting him toward less contentious material. Significant productions were awarded to filmmakers perceived as carrying less professional risk. Midnight Mary represented the final occasion on which Wellman operated with anything approaching genuine creative independence. He maintained his place within the industry, which represents a better outcome than several others on this list achieved, but the expansive professional road he had been traveling contracted into something considerably narrower. He is now acknowledged as one of the defining voices of American cinematic authenticity. During his own professional era, that authenticity was categorized as a career liability. Howard Hawks arrived at Scarface, already establishing the professional standing that would ultimately secure his legendary reputation. Collaborating alongside producer Howard Hughes, he delivered a crime epic of authentic intensity. Paul Muni's portrayal of Tony Camonte blazed through the picture with an energy that carried genuine menace, and Hawks controlled the entire production with a momentum and assurance that perfectly matched his subject matter. It was unsparing, propulsive, and entirely unembarrassed about its content. The Catholic Legion of Decency, alongside municipal authorities throughout the country, maintained that the production celebrated criminal behavior and represented a direct corrupting influence upon American young people. Censorship officials required the addition of moral commentary, substitute conclusions, and additional photography. Certain states declined to permit its exhibition at all. Even as Scarface performed remarkably at the box office, the surrounding controversy designated Hawks as a professional complication in the assessment of particular studio executives. He was directed toward less provocative material. Specific studio relationships cooled. The experience created lasting damage in his relationship with an industry that professed to prize creative courage, while reliably penalizing it whenever it genuinely materialized. Scarface carries universal recognition today as a foundational American cinematic achievement. For the filmmaker responsible for it, the production delivered an unambiguous education in the genuine expense of authentic storytelling within a commercial enterprise governed by apprehension. Jack Conway occupied a position of reliable trust at MGM, a filmmaker who had established consistent versatility across both dramatic and comedic material. Red-Headed Woman extended him further beyond his established territory than any previous assignment. Jean Harlow inhabited the role of Lil Andrews, a woman of breathtaking ambition and absolute absence of remorse, engineering her ascent through privileged society with a sharpness that was authentically entertaining and a calculating quality that was authentically disturbing. Conway embraced both dimensions without reservation. The production functioned as social commentary, but commentary equipped with genuine bite, and it refused to administer the retribution that prevailing moral expectations demanded for a character constructed like Lil. The Catholic Legion of Decency characterized it as a direct assault on the institutions of matrimony and moral integrity. Urban authorities declined to grant exhibition licenses. MGM faced organized pressure to excise scenes and revise the conclusion across various distribution territories. The professional fallout reached Conway with speed and precision. He had been positioned for consideration for the studio's most significant productions, the category of assignments that established reputations at that level of the industry. He was abruptly overlooked. Studio leadership grew concerned about the professional attention his name had begun attracting. He continued working, but the distinguished opportunities had departed. Red-Headed Woman receives recognition today as one of the outstanding pre-code comedic achievements, a production of genuine intelligence and audacity. For Conway, it marked the point at which his professional advancement quietly came to a halt. Wellman claims his second position on this list through Safe in Hell, and the repetition of his name is not incidental. It communicates something fundamental about his identity as a creative professional. Dorothy McHale portrayed Gilda, a woman fleeing her history who discovers herself stranded within a tropical lodging populated by threatening men and circumstances offering no acceptable resolution. Wellman photographed it with the identical unflinching directness that characterized his entire body of work. The production examined fear, hopelessness, and moral deterioration without deflection, and it offered no reassurance to anyone that circumstances would improve. Religious organizations and local censorship officials responded with sustained aggression. The Catholic Legion of Decency pronounced the production categorically unacceptable. Within certain distribution areas, complete sections of the print were ordered destroyed. Studio management, already operating under significant anxiety regarding the tightening regulatory environment, concluded that Wellman represented too unpredictable a professional investment for their continued comfort. His most ambitious, unrealized projects were quietly abandoned. He was redirected toward less volatile subject matter. Safe in Hell stands as confirmation of a filmmaker whose creative instincts were correct with near-consistent reliability. It simultaneously marks the moment the industry determined that those instincts had become too costly to continue accommodating. 10 pictures, 10 filmmakers, 10 professional trajectories permanently altered by a handful of hours projected onto a silver surface. The common thread running through every one of these accounts is not exclusively censorship or public moral anxiety, though both factors contributed their unmistakable influence. The shared element is the specific form of professional retribution that awaited those filmmakers who depicted existence as it genuinely functioned. The entertainment industry has perpetually operated within the commerce of aspiration, and aspiration demands a carefully maintained separation from uncomfortable reality. These particular filmmakers refused to maintain that separation. They produced pictures examining authority and desperation and human longing and the struggle to endure, featuring women who faced no punishment for possessing intelligence and men who laid bare the corruption embedded within American social and commercial structures, featuring human beings moving through a world that operated without fairness, without cleanliness, and without reliable redemption. For that commitment to authenticity, each of them sacrificed their professional standing. Several discovered methods of persisting at the industry's outer edges. Others vanished from the record almost entirely. Yet their pictures endured, and within those pictures the charge of a moment when filmmaking operated without constraint remains palpable, before the barriers descended and the regulations were codified, and the industry mastered the practice of protecting its own interests by eliminating anyone possessed of sufficient courage to tell the truth. Every filmmaker who has subsequently challenged a creative boundary carries some portion of what these 10 risked, including the ones that history ultimately chose to forget.